Alrighty everyone, welcome back to another video, and it's Sword Week. What does that mean, you ask? It means heavy ammo swords have infinite ammo in playlist activities. Things like strikes, gambit, seasonal activities, and more. So, let's look at 3 sword builds where they are 100% centered around swords. Starting with Titans. Now, I'm going to streamline this and only talk about the essential parts of each build, because we've got a lot to get through. Starting out with our abilities. For our super, we're going to be using Blade Fury. Now you're going to need this because Facet of Purpose is dependent upon your super. And for our class ability, we're going to be using the Thrusters. Now you're going to need this one for a special interaction that it has with Drenger's Lash. Speaking of which, let's go to our aspects. Starting out with Drenger's Lash. Activate Thruster to create an unstable knot of strand matter that detonates after a short delay, suspending and damaging targets. We're using swords, so we're going to be up close and personal with these ads. So being able to rush in there, activate your thruster, and suspend targets will let us clean them up real nice and easy with our swords. And next up, we're going to be using Diamond Lance. Okay, basically, you spawn one of these on ability kills or by killing debuffed targets. And what this will do is it'll give us a throwing spear that we can use to freeze more targets. Thanks to our Drenger's Lash, targets are going to be suspended. So upon defeating them, they will drop both a Strand Tangle and a Diamond Lance, which you can throw both of those. And let's go over to our fragments, starting out with Facet of Purpose. Picking up an Orb of Power grants either Amplified, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or Overshield, based on the damage type of your equipped super. This is why we need Blade Fury as our super. So now every Orb of Power will give us 5 seconds of Woven Mail. And Facet of Hope. While you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. So this is needed as things like Restoration and Woven Mail, which will constantly be applied to us, will help us keep our class ability up as much as possible, meaning more suspending detonations. Now let's go over to our exotics, starting out with the Lament. Our intrinsic, Banshee's Wail, reads, Hold block to rev the blade. Increases damage and adds shield piercing to all attacks. Gain stacks when dealing damage with revved attacks. Additional stacks increase the damage and damage resistance of heavy attacks. And our trait, Rev Consumption, reads, Damaging a combatant heals the wielder. So, obviously, this is one of the most powerful swords in the game, for its high damage output and its ability to heal you on charged attacks. And here we're using it because it has basically infinite ammo thanks to Sword Week. But we can make this better with our next exotic, Stronghold. Our trait, Clenched Fist, reads, Maximizes guard stats on equipped swords. You take reduced damage while blocking with a sword. Rapidly damaging targets after blocking shots with a sword grants restoration for a duration determined by the number of shots blocked. So there's a couple good things here, starting with the blocks. You can basically block indefinitely with this. And for just blocking on top of block already negating damage, you will also get damage resistance. And now after blocking damage, you can attack a target with your Lament to gain restoration. As for some mods, the only ones we're really going to want to be looking at here is Argent Blade to consume a stack of Armor Charge to give us bonus damage and bonus recharge rate, and Radiant Orbs to make ourselves Radiant on an Orb of Power pickup. As for our armor mods, you can copy the selection I have currently equipped. Essentially, our gameplay loop revolves entirely around charging up our Lament and blocking damage to deal massive amounts of damage while also gaining plenty of health back. Basically, you run in there, activate your thruster to suspend nearby targets, then you charge up your Lament and kill all those ads to get any health you lost back on hits. So basically for Titans, we can make ourselves unkillable while using this combo. Next up, we're going to look at our Hunters, starting out with our abilities. For our super, you're going to want to use Silence and Squall. Now this is a darkness super that's going to help us become transcendent faster because there's not a whole lot of dark elements in this build. And for our grenade, you're either going to want to use Duskfield Grenade or Grapple Grenade for the same reason. There's not a whole lot of light damage within this build, so you're going to have a hard time getting transcendent without some of these darkness things helping us out. As for our aspects, our first one is going to be Gunpowder Gamble. Defeating targets with abilities or elemental debuff damage will charge a solar explosive. This takes the form of your grenade and can be shot mid-air to cause an ignition. This is helpful as it will trigger Facet of Bravery later on. And because of our build, every target we kill will be marked by an elemental debuff, which will contribute to us getting this faster. Our next aspect is going to be Ascension. Press X while airborne to consume your class ability to propel yourself upward, creating a burst of energy that amplifies allies and jolts targets. Now this is very useful as our dodge isn't really used much, so why not consume it to become amplified and jolt nearby targets. As for our fragments, the first one we have is going to be Facet of Bravery. Your grenade final blows grant volatile rounds to your void weapons. Now this is going to be another way for us to gain volatile rounds for our Void Sword, which, as previously stated, these volatile rounds can be granted by a grenade final blow with your gunpowder gamble. And next up, we're going to be using Facet of Sacrifice. While you have a light buff, your ability final blows grant bonus Darkness Transcendence energy. If you don't try to attack targets with darkness damage, you won't go Transcendent. So this is going to help us out in order to get some passive Darkness Transcendence energy. Now let's go over to our exotics, starting out with Heart Shadow. Our trait, Exhumation, reads, heavy attacks made with full sword energy turn you invisible and fire exploding void projectiles. Our trait, Shot in the Dark, reads, remaining invisible grants this weapon increased damage for a brief duration. Hitting a target with this weapon's projectiles while Shot in the Dark is active weakens them. And our Catalyst allows faster movement while invisible. So, Shot in the Dark activates basically instantly upon going invis. But the really nice part about this sword is that it's able to apply Weaken all on its own, which is very unique and benefited through a lot of the seasonal mods we have in the current seasonal artifact. But this becomes even better with our next exotic, Gerfalcon's Harburg. Our trait, See Me, Feel Me, reads, your void weapons gain volatile rounds after you emerge from being invisible. When you are invisible and defeat a combatant while using a finisher, all of your weapons gain bonus damage. You and nearby allies gain a reserve overshield and improved class ability regeneration. These reserve overshields can be deployed by using a class ability. So, the obvious synergy here is that Heart Shadow's heavy attack turns you invisible. So now, by using your heavy attack, you apply Weaken to targets and gain volatile rounds. And that's along with this exotic having a few other buffs for getting a finisher final blow. Now, as for our seasonal mods, we're going to want to use some like Void Hegemony to get a small amount of Void Overshield upon defeating weakened targets, Expanding Abyss for our Void Sources to deal increased damage to weakened targets, and Argent Blade for our swords to have greater damage and an increased charge rate by consuming a stack of armor charge. As for our armor mods, you can copy the ones I have equipped now. So, essentially, your gameplay loop consists of you throwing your Dusk Field onto a group of enemies and using your heavy attack to weaken them and gain volatile rounds. After defeating enough targets, you can throw a gunpowder grenade for some very good ad clear and damage, and use your Ascension to jolt targets and become amplified. So this build revolves entirely around your survivability to the invisibility that you gain by using your heavy attacks with Heart Shadow. And because of Sword Week, we have infinite ammo, which means we have infinite invisibility. And now we have Warlocks coming in with a 100% real sword build. Starting out with our abilities, we're going to be using Song of Flame, as it's a great general super for Warlocks to buff themselves and their allies. And we're going to need Phoenix Dive, because while Heat Rises is active, you gain Restoration while diving and Scorch targets upon landing. As for our aspects, we're going to start out with Heat Rises. You can fire weapons, melee, and throw grenades while gliding. Consume your grenade to gain Heat Rises, releasing a burst of healing energy that cures nearby allies. The strength of the burst is increased when a healing grenade is consumed. Final blows while airborne increase the duration of Heat Rises and grant melee energy. So, number one, this aspect is great for any sort of jumping encounters, but here it's used to let us stay in the air. Now, why do we want this? I thought we were using swords. Well, we are using swords. It just looks different. But we can have some synergy with our next aspect, Icarus Dash. Press X to dodge while airborne. While Heat Rises is active, you have an additional dodge. While airborne, rapidly defeating targets with your super or weapons cures you. So, with these two aspects combined, we can stay in the air for a very long time, and kills while we are in the air are going to heal us. As for our fragments, we're going to want Ember of Empyrean. Solar weapon or ability final blows extend the duration of restoration and radiant effects applied to you. So what this is going to do is when we activate Heat Rises and use our Phoenix Dive, we gain restoration. We then have a few seconds to get a solar weapon final blow to extend the time of restoration. This basically gives us a constant healing buff on top of the cure healing that we will get while we are airborne. And you're also going to want to use Ember of Ashes to apply more Scorch stacks to targets, because we want to apply more Scorch stacks to targets. Now let's go to our exotics, starting out with 1000 Voices. If you haven't already heard, for some reason, this weapon is receiving the same infinite ammo regeneration that swords are currently receiving. So instead of making a sword build using a sword, I wanted to make a sword build not using a sword. In other words, a 1000 Voices build. Our intrinsic trait, Ahamkara's Eye, reads, Charging this weapon unleashes a giant continuous beam of death. And our trait, Unforeseen Repercussions, reads, this weapon's beam superheats its targets upon impact, causing delayed, scorching explosions. So this exotic getting infinite ammo is frightening for anyone or thing on the receiving end. I don't have much to say other than this weapon applies Scorch and can ignite targets, which makes it very fun to use. And for our next exotic, we're going to be using Dawn Chorus. Our trait, Rites of Ember, reads, your Daybreak projectiles deal more damage and scorch targets on impact. Your Scorch is improved and you gain a small amount of melee energy when your Scorch damages a target. So this exotic basically buffs our Scorch effects in general, making them deal a lot more damage in PvE. So when paired with 1000 Voices, which scorches targets, these two make a really great pair. As for our seasonal mods, the ones you're going to want on are Solar Fulmination for increased damage and radius for our ignitions, Radiant Orbs to make ourselves radiant on orb of power pickup, and Shield Crush for bonuses to our grenade cooldown while Radiant is active. As for our armor mods, the only one I specifically recommend are Solar Loaders for our 1000 Voices. So basically what you're going to do here is consume your grenade to activate Heat Rises. Then use your Phoenix Dive to gain Restoration. You then have about 5 seconds to get a solar weapon kill to extend the duration of your restoration. Once you have, you can fly up into the air and continue to shoot your 1000 Voices like an orbital laser, where you'll continue to extend the time of your restoration buff and cure yourself, giving you a couple really great healing options. So, these are the 3 builds that I'll be using throughout Sword Week. Sword Week is a really cool little event that Bungie cooked up, and I would love to see more stuff along these lines in the future. But, let me know what you think about this event down in the comments below. And as always, stay alrighty.